Hello, fifth grade. It is science time, and we are continuing in chapter 6 with section 6.9, the power of rocket engines. Now, I hope you have been liking learning about the different things about engines, but rockets are very different from the engines that we just learned about. And so I'm going to tell you a little bit about that. Now, gasoline and diesel engines, they actually mix fuel and air in this carburetor, right? And then they're ignited by the spark plug in the cylinder, which burns and makes that little combustion, right? And so that is different from then jet engines, which we learned about yesterday, right? Jet engines burn fuel after it combines with the air rushing through the combustion chamber. Okay, well, now all of these engines depend on air for their oxygen. Okay, remember, because all fuels must have oxygen in order to burn. Well, rocket engines also need oxygen to burn, but burn their fuel, but they don't get it from air. They actually carry their own supply of oxygen, okay? Because they don't need the air. They actually can exist underwater and in space. So that's cool about rocket engines. Now, China made our first rocket, and it was actually called the fire arrow. And so that's really interesting that they started shooting these fire arrows in wartime, and that's where other people saw the first rocket style thing, and then they started developing their own rockets. Okay, so there's also missiles, and missiles are guided military rockets, and they are either fired from the ground or from planes or from boats. And when I say guided, it means that they're able to control their direction. Okay, there's also flares, and flares are just a short-range rocket typically used to let people know where they're located in times of emergency, like either from out in the boat, if you're trying to get somebody to come help you out, if you're stranded in your boat somewhere out on a water, or flares could be also used on the sides of the road to indicate like cars are stopped and you need to move over. So those are when we would use flares. Okay, so there's also two types of rocket engines. The first one is the solid fuel rocket. Now, this uses a solid substance of chemicals called a propellant, in which it is in the combustion chamber. When it's in the combustion chamber, it is ignited with a flame, which touches the propellant, and that fuel burns, causing hot gases to rush out the bottom, pushing or thrusting up the bottom of the rocket. Now, when the rocket engine stops burning this propellant, then it causes the rocket to stop. So it's all one thing at one time. It just ignites all of that propellant, it thrusts it up into the sky, and then when it's done, it just comes back down, okay? An example of a solid fuel rocket is that of the 150 feet tall rockets that are on the side of the space shuttle. So those big like tubes that look on the side, and what happens is those tubes do that where the propellant is in there, and then it ignites and it burns that all up. It shoots it in the air, the space shuttle, and it only actually burns for only 2 minutes, and that's all it has because it's got to thrust that big space shuttle up into the sky, right? And then they actually release those tubes and drop them on the into the ocean, and that's why the space shuttle is actually always launched close to water so that they could drop those big rocket tanks on the side that will then go ahead and those release. So those are what hold all of the fluid in there, and they release those as it pushes the space shuttle up into the sky. Okay, and next we have the liquid fuel rockets. Now, these have both oxygen and fuel, but they're not in solid form. They're actually in liquid form, and they're kept at different temperatures, and they're actually stored in two tanks, the oxygen tank and the fuel tank. Okay, and when these two are mixed together in the combustion chamber with a spark, then they too produce that gas that shoots out the bottom, and then it thrusts the rocket up into the sky. Or if it's being dropped from an airplane, it could thrust it forward, or even from a submarine, it can thrust it forward through the water, right? These rockets are only used when they can make the two tanks to be able to hold the liquids different, okay, in different tanks. So that way they can release as much as they want or as little as they want. So it's actually a controlled type of rocket, okay? And let me see. And this is used in the spacecraft. Okay, and so basically what happens is when the space shuttle is up in space, it has another type of rocket within it where they can actually release a little bit of those two parts in the tanks, the oxygen and the fuel together, and they can thrust forward. And the more that they release, the faster it would go, and the slower they release, the slower it would go. So the interesting thing about liquid fuel engines is they can even turn them off in space, and then they can actually turn them back on. So this is more of a controlled rocket that can be used because they can release as much as they want or as little as they want. Okay, so I hope that helps, where you guys get a little bit about rocket engines, and I will attach another video so you guys can see a little bit about that. And I hope that you're enjoying science, and I will talk to you tomorrow.